The new government in Greece has been on a European tour this week to persuade EU leaders to end the era of austerity. The trip of Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras and his Finance Minister Yanis Varoufakis was quickly dubbed a charm offensive, as it was all about hugs and smiles. But behind those friendly handshakes, like this one just here with the head of the European Council, Donald Tusk, there's been a strong understanding that the talks on the Greek debt would indeed be difficult. The EU Commission Chief, Jean-Claude Juncker, despite a warm welcome, stressed that Athens should stick to its obligations. And the same approach followed the EU Parliament Chief, Martin Schulz. A member of the UK Independence Party believes Tsipras shouldn't be misled by the smiles.
Mr Juncker are very good at sort of being frightfully friendly and leading people down the garden path while holding their hands. But the thing is, it's not necessarily going to result in anything. If Greece leaves the European currency, what will happen then is if they start to do well, it's going to have a domino effect right across southern Europe and probably the rest of Europe as well. So they're desperately keen to keep the Greeks in, and they'll do whatever they can. And I think the sooner the Greeks get out of the euro and float their own currency and start to improve their economy, the better for Greece, and they shouldn't be led down the garden path by a very sweet-talking Mr Juncker.
Unlike the warm reception in Brussels, Greece got something of a cold shoulder in Berlin. The hopes of Athens' new finance minister to renegotiate its country's debt were harshly knocked back at a meeting with his German counterpart.
We didn't find mutual solutions, and there is no need to find them today. Troika must continue in Greece.
However, it's not that Greece has failed to drum up support for its anti-austerity plan across the EU. Italy, while their anti-EU five-star movement praised the party's victory as if it was their own. Spain's left wing, Podemos, celebrated the wind of change blowing across the EU, and the French Left Party proclaimed an end to the era of the, quote, all-power arrogance of neoliberals in Europe. Now, we've got more news coming your way, but that's coming after a short break.
It means someone's boots on the ground, for sure. Now,
he wants to push as far as he can.
Once you state the goal, then you have to put plans in place to achieve the goal.
I want to free France from the EU straitjacket.
What we have here is we have the bond markets sending us warning signals.
Our own politicians, even those who are voting for those measures, do not believe in them.
Well, we cannot surrender so easily our social rights, our civic pride.
Of another brutal execution of a hostage by Islamic State. Jordanian pilot Muath al-Kazizber was burned alive while trapped inside a cage. Meanwhile, the killings by Islamic State have drawn comparisons to the increasingly regular beheadings carried out in Saudi Arabia. A Saudi official, hit back at the international criticism, saying the country executes convicts on a legal basis, unlike Islamic State. However, both the terrorist group and the Gulf monarchy base their versions of justice on a hardline interpretation of Sharia law. Blasphemy, homosexual acts, treason, as well as murder are punishable by beheading in Saudi Arabia and Islamic State. Under both regimes, convicted adulterers can even be stoned to death. Stealing as well is a serious crime in both cases and is punishable by limb amputations. The Saudi record has been slammed by human rights watchdogs, but Western governments aren't so quick to condemn the executions, as activist Danny Mackey explains.
This is not just a violation of human rights, it's a violation of pure humanity. So when Saudi Arabia compares this to a legitimate Islamic way of punishment, then they're no better than ISIS. In my opinion, Saudi Arabia has a sort of political consensus or a deal with the Western countries. They continue to commit human rights abuses, and in return, the West is silent on this for political credit, for continuation and excellent economic relations. Saudi Arabia, in terms of a human rights sense, is one of the worst states in the world, and the king being deceased and a new king coming into power, this won't change anything, as this is a problem within Saudi Arabia which is met with genuine silence by the West, and this makes the West complicit in these forms of violence perpetrated by Saudi Arabia.
Meanwhile, Canadian intelligence group iBravo says it's tracked down a female Islamic State fighter via Twitter after she left the geolocation feature on when posting messages. We caught up with Jeff Wayers. He's the man behind the investigation.
This is the first documented case that we put out in our report with the Terrorism Research and Analysis Consortium of a female being on the front lines. So when you look at her geolocation, what you see is on the 25th of December, when ISIS was really under siege by the coalition troops and by the YPG Kurdish troops, is that she was in Kobani when they were in one of the biggest battles for their existence in Kobani. My opinion would be she probably wasn't fighting. She was probably there for the purpose of intelligence.
Ironically, this time, Islamic State has fallen victim to its own propaganda weapon of choice, social media. Let's take a look at some tactics extremists are using them. So, the group manages thousands of accounts to avoid deletion and always stay online. It tries to generate viral content like creating new internet memes, increasing the reach of their message. They launch hashtag campaigns on Twitter, engaging their audience, but also attracting a lot of mockery and trolling as well. Islamic State backers have been reporting up to 40,000 tweets a day. Wow. But as the latest revelations show, some of those posts play into the hands of Islamic State's enemies. This week, American credit rating agency Standard & Poor's downgraded some of Russia's biggest banks and companies. While S&P sees negative outlook in the number of major Russian companies, China disagrees. Its largest rating agency, Dagong, put Moscow's economic prospects at A, actually. Sylvain Rains, who used to work at Moody's agency but now owns his own independent ratings firm, explains why estimates may differ.
Two people can look at the same weather forecast. One person will conclude that the 50% probability will be on the other side and therefore it will not rain. The other person will conclude that it will rain. Yet they're both looking at the same data. So the existence of a discrepancy is not a sign by itself that something is wrong, because we're dealing with the future. Unfortunately, in a sovereign area, there is way too much discretion because there is no framework of analysis. So that opens the door to what I would describe as a rather wishful thinking, some people would say political, or politically minded behavior on the part of people who stand on one side or the other of an issue.
Well, it was a tough week for Standard & Poor's agency itself. It was fined $1.4 billion by the US government over allegations it knowingly inflated its ratings of risky mortgage bonds. And it's not the first time S&P has been in trouble. In 2012, Italy charged 5 of its employees with market manipulation. And a year before that, politicians and bankers from Eurozone countries accused the agency of political bias. Climbing up an icy wall. You're watching amazing footage right here. Historic ascent by William Gadd. There he is. His friends call him Captain Adventure, and that is for good reason, as you can see, very justified indeed. He's the first person in the world to conquer the frozen Niagara Falls. Now, we caught up with him, and he described his fearless feat.
What really fires me up about doing any sort of climbing is figuring out a problem and solving it well and in an interesting, cool way. For me, this is just figuring out a really complicated puzzle in an interesting way. First thing you want to do at ice climbing is not fall off. If I fell off while I was climbing, especially down low, I would have ended up in this kind of cauldron of doom where the water was all swirling. And the second thing is just what an amazing place to be, you know? I was climbing Niagara Falls. How cool is that? It's really hard to get permission to do what I did. It took a lot of people working at it. And even when I started climbing it, I kept waiting for this bullhorn or this big yell, stop, you can't do that, you know? So when I finally got to the top, I was just really, really happy that it had all come together and we'd done it safely.
Yeah, boys! Woo!
Everyone knows that putting a happy, sad or angry icon at the end of your message is nothing more than a bit of fun, really. But for one teenager, that simple action landed him in a whole lot of hot water. So Brooklyn teen Osiris Aristi posted on Facebook a status like this one just here. Only instead of an abstract face of some sort, he used a cartoon representation of a police officer. Days later, the NYPD arrested Aristi for making a terrorist threat, they claimed. A grand jury has thrown out the charges, which carried up to 7 years in prison. But Aristi is still facing time for illegal gun possession. The NYPD say they found a weapon in his bedroom when they came to arrest him. The teen's lawyer told us the case is just bizarre.
As of now, there's no precedent, there's no legal precedent for equating emojis with terroristic threats, and I think that's part of the novelty of this case. It's so unusual. It hasn't happened before. The law my client was charged under was designed for real terrorists, like people like Osama bin Laden and Timothy McVeigh, who blew up the Oklahoma City federal courthouse. The statute was directed at terrorism, and so charging a teenager who's posting maybe distasteful things or boastful things on Facebook with making a terroristic threat definitely is an overreach. I don't think that there was any intent in any of the alleged posts that to scare anybody or to frighten anybody or intimidate anybody or coerce anybody, which are the things that you need to do to be implicated under the terroristic threat statute.
British spy agency GCHQ acted unlawfully when it used data provided by the US National Security Agency in its surveillance practices. That's according to this week's decision by the UK court, set up to keep intelligence agencies in check. Apparently, the deal between the NSA and GCHQ had not really had enough oversight, but the ruling only applies to the period between 2007 and 2014. Meanwhile, Berlin is also conducting an inquiry into the GCHQ surveillance activities, and it's reportedly leaving both Germany and British spies jittery. The German Focus magazine reports that British chief spies are so anxious their secrets will be revealed that they threaten to stop sharing information with their counterparts in Berlin, leaving one senior German intelligence official to say they'd be left blind without signals from London. Intelligence analyst Glenmore Trenier-Harvey thinks the British will follow through on the threat.
GCHQ is very fortunate in that it sits on the cables that come in from the United States, the internet traffic, the telephone traffic, and that combined with the closeness of operations between the Americans and the British make them the focal point for any European operation. So should there be surveillance in Germany, I mean oversight rather than surveillance, and they demand answers from GCHQ, well, frankly, the British won't give it. They will just take their ball and leave the game, and that will leave the German BND, as the director said, blind.
Well, talking about spying, coming up, our special report on the notorious spying practices of the US security agencies. So stay with us for that.